Here we go. Welcome, everybody. It's the Konflux community call, March 26th. Today, we've got 2 points on the agenda, one from Brian, one from Hector. Brian, you're up first. Feel free to take it away.
Great. I'm putting this into the chat here, but it's also into the notes. So I wrote up this ADR, this architectural decision record. It's an idea, and I was hoping for some feedback. It's kind of why I'm here socializing it. Feedback is welcome here on the call and also on the PR, and also after the call, if you're watching this on YouTube, anything that feels good to you. And the primary observation that I have, because I always like to lead with problems, and we can talk about solutions later. So the Konflux as a build system is amazing for all the reasons probably way better than me even. I'm a Konflux user. The project that I work on at work has been built on Konflux for, I don't know, I'd say at least 12, probably 18 months at this point. So, the issue that I'm seeing a gap in terms of building has to do with building non-OCI artifacts. So for OCI artifacts, I think the norms are really clear. And you know what they are. They're distributed through OCI registries. The refers API is used. All of the assets around those artifacts, like the SBOMs and the signatures and any other assets produced, artifacts produced, are all uploaded there. They're stored in certain formats, and that's all pretty well established. Now, but when we start talking about non-OCI artifacts, so when I say that term, I mean things like language native artifacts. So think Python wheels, think maybe to some extent RPMs. It's not really a language, but NPM, Maven, Go binaries, whatever the major languages are. And each of those has kind of its own bespoke distribution method. Excuse me. And the challenges, and what I'm hoping that we can have some sort of shared strategy, which is what this ADR attempts to put forth, is to, when you're building an OCI, a non-OCI artifact, cool, I think it's back now.
Yeah.
Hardware.
We lost you at when you're building a non-OCI artifact.
Yeah, when you're building a non-OCI artifact, where do you go with it? Right now, it goes into an OCI registry, and that's great. And there's a previous ADR that this one builds on top of, which was ratified, I guess, about 2 weeks ago, which I forget the number. Maybe it's ADR 63. It's referred to here. Yeah, it's referred to here in as like prior work. That kind of says, well, when you're building non-OCI artifacts, you need to publish them into OCI registries just like you would an OCI artifact. And that's great. That's a standardized internal way for Konflux to always have a standard place to put things. But the problem is that language native clients, like the clients that most of the world uses, things like pip or Maven or DNF, NPM, all these language native clients, they can't pull out of OCI registries. There's a couple ways to solve that. I think in some conversations we've had over, I guess, a couple of years at this point, probably going back to 2023, there was a general working idea or a desire that maybe those languages would decide to adopt OCI registries as their package distribution server side. I don't think that ever panned out. I don't know of a single major widely used pre-existing language that has done that. There are a few plugin examples that have come along the way, but they haven't they're kind of just proof of concepts, and they've definitely not been adopted by a user base. So in a way, this is kind of a binary value problem in the sense that, like, well, either you're going to go with the amazing Conflux build system, but you actually, after you build those artifacts, you can't actually distribute them to really any users, more or less, that care, using tools that are standardized in all these language ecosystems. Or you don't go with Conflux and you build your packages some other way, and you do distribute them in a language native way. So hopefully I've characterized the problem in a way that's motivating and clear. And the solution that's pitched in this ADR is pretty basic. It just says that as a general practice, the Conflux community should strive, when building non-OCI artifacts, to additionally distribute those artifacts in a language native way. If you're not familiar with what that means in practice, that can probably sound a little bit vague. There's a lot of options out there. So I mean, every language has kind of like their big warehouse in the sky. There's Maven Central, there's PyPy, there's the NPM ones. So, you know, that could mean upload them there. If that's what you want, if that's a way that you can reach your users. There's also a bunch of kind of more private hosted package managers. There are things like Nexus and Artifactory and Pulp. And then there's also, you know, there's ones that are distributed by, for example, like GitHub has their own one that supports like 5 or 6 language types. Google Artifact Manager is another very popular solution in the marketplace. So when I say distribute things in a language native way, I'm not assuming that you have any, we're not picking winners and losers in that area. Like, you can use whatever one you want. But the idea is that let's have the value that was just built on Conflux, by Conflux, those non-OCI artifacts distributed in a language native way. There's one last point, and then I'd love to maybe have some discussion. The idea of distributing the artifact itself, that's pretty basic and important, because if you can't install it using the language native client like pip or Maven, well, you can't install it. Okay, but the part of the big value proposition of Conflux, as you know, is the SBOMs and the signatures and how it was built, where it was built, and all those sorts of attestations. There's mixed support, and I would say maybe spotty support in each language, and each language is kind of coming along at its own pace and in its own way. I'll use Python as an example. So Python uses the Python Enhancement Proposal Process, the PEP. And there's a PEP, I forget the number, but I think it's in the ADR, that specifies which that SBOMs and attestations can be distributed using a specific API, which is implemented by pypy.org, which is like their big warehouse in the sky. And they have not yet finalized or implemented the pip, the client side of that API. But obviously that's their roadmap and trajectory. So at some point in the near future, pip is going to have things like verify SBOM attributes, or make sure that the signatures conform to my signing requirements in terms of where these packages were built, and to some extent how they were built. And that's going to be done in a language native way in the Python ecosystem. So in addition to publishing the non-OCI artifact itself, like the Python wheel, this ADR establishes that to the extent possible, and this is a little bit vague, something I struggled with in its authorship, to the extent possible, have the SBOMs and signatures also distributed through those very same package managers in a language native way. Because the support for those is done language by language, it's very jagged in terms of how mature those are. And I wouldn't say any language is actually fully there. And so if this got ratified, what would practically change today? Well, publishing the artifacts themselves in a way that's consumable, I think, is definitely capable, definitely something that could happen today. For say Python as an example, you can upload attestations to pypy.org or another package manager like Maven or Artifactory or Pulp or something like that. But over time, as those languages become less jagged in terms of their attestation and SBOM hosting support and serving those assets, this community will have to continue to kind of implement that along the way. So if you read the ADR, it's conceptual in this area because the differing language types, I mean, we could have an ADR per language type. The idea with this one is, as a concept, as a general value proposition, my pitch is to collectively recognize that it's a good thing to take the build artifacts, which is a big part of the Konflux value, and connect it to how a large user base of all the major language types consume and verify those types of assets. So that's the long and short of it.
That's great, Brian. Thank you. Yeah, Mikola, go ahead. For everybody else, if you have questions or comments, just use the raise your hand feature and we'll get you in. Go ahead, Mikola.
Yeah, thank you. So first of all, thank you, Brian, for the IDR. I agree with majority of the statements you just mentioned. I have a question regarding build side. So I completely understand at release time, we can distribute the artifacts to the target systems where they should be stored. But what's the value or purpose of doing it in build pipeline? Because you mentioned it in the ADR. So I still don't see a big value for this, despite technically we can do it because I believe so we can reuse the same task and publish them to internal registry.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I love how you've clearly looked at the ADR, and I love that. It's debatable. That's, for me, it's not like a must-have, but here's where it's coming from. Like is said here in the chat by Martin, it's for testing purposes. People, I think, as I understand it, run their pipelines kind of different ways, but sometimes you're building a package and you're building a specific package, and then whenever you go to test that package, it pulls, the scope of interest is really that single package itself. And so you can kind of bundle your testing inside of your pipeline. I don't know if that's a common practice, but I imagine it would be. In that case, it's kind of like, why would you ever publish the pre-release packages in a way that's consumable? But sometimes, you want to test that on other systems that are outside the pipeline before you actually release it. And then distinct from that, separately, there's sometimes folks want to build down the dependency tree, and those packages may be built by different pipelines. This is actually specifically the case where I work. And so it's difficult within a single pipeline to perform all of that testing that you might need to do. But it's also possible that, after the package is built within the pipeline, it could pull from the base of all other previously built packages. I mean, that would definitely work. I think if I remember correctly, because I authored this like 2 weeks ago, I think that the pre-release was, I went back and forth on this. I think I landed on must, but then originally I had should. I would also be I could also understand not wanting to add an additional requirement on pre-release. But anyways, the value is testing, and I think that's mostly up for you all to help guide.
Yeah, thank you very much for the answers. So yeah, to some degree, it makes sense to me. So the only concern is basically infrastructure, where to host those, because they probably need to be private or like local to the test itself. And hosting, like, it's okay to host something near Konflux, but my concern here is to have it isolated, because if I build one package and push it in from one pull request pipeline into some, I don't know, registry, and second pull request does the same, and then if in my testing I'm pulling something, so we need to be sure that we are pulling and testing the very artifact we've just built within build pipeline, but tests are usually done in integration pipeline. So like, we need to be careful on that side. Yeah, with isolation. Yeah, thank you. But yeah, thank you, Brian.
I agree. Just one quick short comment about that, and then maybe we go on. Thank you for your question. Yes, I completely agree in terms of isolation. And one of my goals, what I'm not trying to do is require every Konflux instance to necessarily come with a language native package manager that sits next to it. That design, because I'm not trying to put this burden on every user everywhere. At the same time, I do think something like that architecturally is needed as Konflux moves more into the non-OCI artifact space. So that, I think that has a lot more to do with what your community's temperament is to have like an upstream, fully open source project, kind of able to be easily deployed next to Konflux in a way that makes that easy for users. I could also very much argue the point, which would resonate with me, like, hey, this is an undue burden. Like the value is there, but it's just not something that we can require from everyone. So I'm even a little unsure on what to do in that area. My goal is to not create undue burden. That's where I'm at on that. Ralph, you're moderating, but I think I see Eric's hand next, if that's okay.
Yeah, that makes sense. Go for it.
So my brainstorming question would be, instead of trying to bend Konflux into building non-OCI artifacts, would it probably a better idea to work on and evolve on tooling working with the OCI artifacts? So for example, for your specific use case, you said testing, Auras, if I recall correctly, can already manipulate OCI artifacts. And there's been the question on how to really store or publish RPMs using OCI to Quay, and that has been open for, I don't know, at least for a year. So instead of trying to, build non-OCI artifact directly, would it make sense for us to think of what additional overlay tooling we need to build everything as OCI, and have your build packages, how many you have, as individual layers in the OCI artifact, and then just use or build something on top of Auras so that you can consume this transparently, right? So in the input, it's still an OCI, but by the time you actually consume it within your testing, it's going to be unpacked from the artifact. And to you as an end user, it all appears as an OCI native artifact. Does it make sense?
It does. I think my video is frozen, but that's quite fine with me. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And that is still an on-table strategy. It's let's see what to say about that. One of the complicating factors around that is metadata production. So for example, like with RPMs, you need to generate additional metadata assets so that DNF can consume that. And similarly for for Python. You need to generate more metadata assets. You could teach or try to teach Konflux to do that, and then you can put that metadata probably also inside the OCI artifact. But yeah, exactly. But one of the challenges, for instance, like Ralph is mentioning, create repo C, yeah, it's work. And for example, like if you have a RPM repository with lots and lots of RPMs in it, create repo C actually requires you to bring all of those RPMs down locally in order for create repo C to run. And so, you know, you end up in this architectural position where if you want to build one single RPM, you end up having to move all RPMs down to wherever you're going to produce that metadata. There are some systems out there like package managers, like for instance, Pulp, which is a project that I am associated with. I'm not here to push that because you should use whatever package manager makes sense for you. But you know, Pulp does, for instance, help solve that problem pretty well, where you know we index non-OCI artifacts when you upload them to us to a hosted like local version of Pulp. It's fully open source, and then we can produce that metadata without having to move around the RPMs. But partly you'll find language by language that producing that metadata is like a thing that you have to do, and it does take work. And then the other aspect is you might, you know, one of the strategies I've seen in the past, which also still might work, is to have plugins for things like pip and plugins for DNF that teach the client how to fetch data in an OCI native way. I've seen a couple of proof of concepts of that over the years, but it hasn't really caught on. I don't think it needs to be widely adopted by a large user base of people on the internet and in enterprises for that to be a viable strategy. I definitely think it's a viable strategy. Part of the reason why I don't think it's really gone much of anywhere at all, more than just like a couple of point POCs over the past 3 or 4 years I've been watching this, is there just doesn't seem to be an appetite for anyone to actually make that their core mission. And doing it across, say, 7 to 10 to 12 languages it's a lot of work. And then when you next to that put another idea or an observation, which is every enterprise, and I think Konflux is primarily geared towards enterprises. I don't think a lot of individuals are going to run Konflux to build their own packages, maybe some. They already have these package managers. You know, everybody has an Artifactory. Everybody has a Maven. Everybody has a Google Artifact Manager. And so from an economics perspective, yes, that strategy would work, but like if you already have these package managers, you know, maybe it's just a lot easier to use them. I hope I'm not reading as a naysayer, because it is absolutely a viable strategy. If that's something that folks wanted to pursue as an alternate ADR, I would completely understand. I don't know how to fund that though, and it would need to come with some sort of like implementation plan and timeline.
Hey, I'll go next. I got my hand up. I just want to say that I'm broadly in favor of the ADR as it's written. Brian, did you know that it's base 64 encoded in the markdown file in the PR?
No.
I'd love to know how that happened, but you can base 64 decode it locally and read it.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. The only thing I would quibble over are like the musts and the shoulds. What's a must and what's a should? The way it happens to be written right now, I'm in favor of that, but it actually doesn't match what you said a second ago about the build time one being must or should. But we can go over that in async review in the PR. I just wanted to say that broadly. I think the release side of things is really non-controversial. Like we already translate, like it's almost the fundamental role of release pipelines is to translate the OCI representation into the non-OCI representation somewhere, to put RPMs in a repo somewhere, to put Python packages in whatever downstream system they need to be consumed by to make them available to clients. The stuff about having to also do that for supply chain metadata artifacts is an excellent addition. It's something we should have always been doing from the beginning, and it's inconsistent right now, so 100% +1. The one about the build time side of things is the more controversial one. It's what we've been talking about here. And the way the language is written right now in the ADR is that build and integration pipelines, it doesn't just say build pipelines must. It says build and integration pipelines should expose those artifacts via native package tooling, but it doesn't specify the mechanism, which is fine. It's a non, but maybe if we want it to be stronger, we could try to make that more specific as to the mechanism. But if we leave the mechanism out, then it's, you know, like the Mikola described, or maybe it was Eric described ORAUth pull as like an option that just it would expose the content in a non-OCI way. Having to run create repo C would be one. Using pulp, there's this pulp access controller that people in Brian's community have contributed to Konflux to make pulp repositories available for build time interaction. So all of those I think are still options.
Yeah, that all makes sense to me. Maybe you can represent some of that, if you don't mind, on the PR when I base 64 decode it, and let's. And I do think it. I think if I'm understanding you right, and I'm agreeing if it is the case, it would, if we're going to put that in there, it would be better to provide clarity around what that means, and maybe not be prescriptive in terms of a single solution, but just recognize several options there, or maybe disinclude that from the ADR as a way to kind of break this problem down into smaller parts, which I always think is a good strategy. I'd be very happy to split it up as well.
Any other questions, comments for Brian? If not, Brian, thank you for coming to present this. And everybody, so this is a formal process. This opens the 2-week call for comments period on the ADR. The KGC Konflux Governance Committee will try to make a call on it 2 weeks from now on April 9th, unless we've got ongoing discussion and contention in the ADR, in which case we'll just extend it to go from there. But please get your comments in once it gets base 64 decoded, and then we'll have our continued conversation there.
Yep, I'll be doing that now. Just before I go, I just want to say that the project I work on is a big benefactor of rebuilding Konflux, and I really appreciate the upstream community that has helped guide so many important decisions and usages. We really enjoy using Konflux, and it's not often I sit in front of a group that I get to say that directly to. So thank you for all of your work.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Looking at the attendees list and at the agenda, we have another point on there on a retrospective on Kube Archive, or a retroactive ADR on Kube Archive, but Hector's not here today, so I think we've got to punt that to another day, unless someone is here to present on his behalf. Assuming not, I'll kick that to the agenda for next time, and that ends our call today. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Brian, thank you again for presenting. Everybody, we'll see you in the tubes.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.